This week, in our What is Truth series, we look at the question, which is the greatest commandment? God had used Moses to deliver the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. For 40 years they wandered through the wilderness en route to the Promised Land. It was during this time that God called Moses into the mountains and gave him 10 laws to present to the people. In Deuteronomy 5:22, Moses says to the Israelites, "These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness." And he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. A summary of these commandments are as follows. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet. The 10 Commandments have played a fundamental role in both religious and secular aspects of our society. As Christians, we believe they are biblical principles relating to ethics and worship. The law, as set forth in these commandments, also shows us our inability to keep God's laws and is proof of our sin, and therefore our need of a Savior. On a secular note, the 10 Commandments have long stood as a symbol of the ideals embodied in our judicial system. Despite the success of some who have tried to have them removed from various aspects of our society, there is no denying their significance in our heritage and legal development. Some see the 10 Commandments as being Old Testament revelation and having less relevance in the New Testament. Jesus did give us a new perspective on these commandments. In Matthew 5:21, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder,' and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Matthew 5:27-28, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This new perspective by no means lessened their importance. The fact is, in Matthew 5:17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." It was on this subject that some of the so-called religious leaders of the time decided to test Jesus. We read in Matthew 22:35-36, one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Which would you think is the greatest? There are obvious ones like murder, stealing, and honoring our parents. Others like keeping the Sabbath day holy, taking the Lord's name in vain, and even the one on adultery seem to have less regard for many in today's society. But Jesus was asked to pick the most important one. In verses 37-39, we see his answer. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus summarized all the commandments into one word, love. Loving God and loving others. The best way to honor God and keep his commandments is to love him. When we love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, we won't want to worship other gods or take his name in vain. When we love God and love our neighbor, we'll have no desire to kill, steal, or do anything else to hurt others. Jesus concluded in verse 40 by saying, "All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments." The test was given, and in today's standards we might say Jesus passed with flying colors. If you are trying to judge yourself on how well you keep God's commandments, stop and ask yourself the question, do I love God? Do I love others? For your eternal destiny hang on these two questions.